Number 1. Thabo Bester. Sometime around 4 in the morning on the 3rd of May, 2022, a fire broke out inside a cell at the Mangaung Correctional Center, a maximum security prison in Bloemfontein, South Africa. When staff got the flames under control, they found a body inside, burned so badly it was unrecognizable. The prisoner registered to that cell was a man named Thabo Bester, a convicted rapist and murderer serving a life sentence. Officials declared him dead on the scene. The Department of Correctional Services put out a public statement that same day saying Bester had set himself on fire, but Thabo Bester was not in that cell when it burned. He had already walked out of the prison hours earlier, through an emergency exit, dressed in a guard's uniform. The body left behind was not his. It belonged to a man named Katlago Bering Mafolo, someone who had been reported missing a full month before the escape, and Mafolo had not died in the fire. The post-mortem would eventually show he had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head before the cell was ever set alight. Someone had murdered him, transported his body into a maximum security prison, and burned it in place of Thabo Bester. For nearly a year, not a single official admitted that any of this had happened. Bester was born on the 13th of June, 1986, at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto. His mother, Maria Mabaso, had grown up working on farms, and because her own birth had never been formally registered with the government, she was unable to register her sons either. And as far as the state was concerned, he essentially did not exist on paper. He picked up his first criminal conviction for fraud at 17. By 19, he was back in jail for fraud again, served 2 years, and then broke parole. After that, the crimes became far more serious. He started targeting women through Facebook. He would build a fake profile, approach models with offers of work or opportunity, arrange in-person meetings, and when they showed up, he would rape and rob them. South African media started calling him the Facebook rapist. At least one of his victims did not survive. He also murdered his girlfriend, a woman named Namfundo Tihulu. In 2011, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to the murder. A judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. He was sent to the Mangaung Correctional Center in Bloemfontein, the capital city of South Africa's Free State Province. Mangaung was privately operated under a government contract by G4S, a British multinational security company with operations across dozens of countries. G4S described Mangaung as one of the most secure correctional facilities in the country. What that reputation didn't account for was what a resourceful, manipulative prisoner could quietly build over 11 years inside it. Bester did not stop operating just because he was locked up. From inside Mangaung, he set up a fake media and events company he called 21st Century Media. He used this front company to conduct business, build relationships on the outside, and maintain communication channels that a life-sentenced prisoner is not supposed to have. It also turned out that he had an unauthorized phone and a laptop inside his cell. Prison staff only discovered those devices after the fire. The person most closely connected to Bester during his time in prison, and the person the state would later accuse of being his co-mastermind, was a woman named Nandifa Magudumana. She had a public professional profile, her own legal practice, a husband named Makusali Magudumana, and 2 children. On a normal day, nothing should have connected her to Thabo Bester, but this wasn't a normal case. Exactly how and when their relationship began has not been fully established in court proceedings. But what investigators eventually pieced together is that Magudumana had been helping Bester manage his business activities from outside the prison, and that she was centrally involved in planning the escape. The plan to get Bester out of Mangaung was organized over a period of months. It involved multiple people, and it required solving a very specific problem. If Bester simply walked out or broke out, there would be an immediate manhunt. But if Thabo Bester was officially declared dead, if there was a body, a fire, and a death certificate, he could disappear without anyone looking for him. The scheme depended entirely on having a body to leave behind. According to information that emerged during South African parliamentary hearings, Magudumana allegedly accessed 2 bodies from a morgue. The first body was reportedly found in a river before it could be used. The second made it to the prison. That second body was Katlago Bering Mafolo. He had gone missing in April of 2022, roughly a month before the escape. The exact circumstances of how Mfolo died and how his body came to be in Magudumana's possession had not been fully established in court. What the autopsy confirmed is that he died from blunt force trauma to the head, and that he was already dead before the fire in Bester's cell was started. With the body secured, the next challenge was getting it inside the prison. That is where the corruption becomes impossible to ignore. In the hours before the escape, an unauthorized vehicle arrived at Mangaung Correctional Center carrying a large television cabinet, large enough to conceal a human body. Neither the vehicle nor the cabinet was searched. There was no authorization on record for the delivery. It was brought inside the prison without any of the checks that a maximum security facility is supposed to enforce. When South African lawmakers questioned G4S officials about this in parliamentary hearings, the officials conceded it had happened, and no satisfactory explanation was offered for how it was allowed. Bester had also been quietly setting up his position inside the prison in the weeks leading up to the escape. He submitted a formal application to be moved into solitary confinement, telling prison administrators that his life was in danger, that a gang was targeting him and he needed protection. The request was granted 3 days before the escape. The solitary cell he was moved to happened to be much closer to one of the prison's emergency exits. In other words, Bester had quietly arranged his own positioning inside the facility. Late on the night of May 2nd, into the early hours of May 3rd, the plan was put into motion. The body of Katlego Mfolo was brought out of the TV cabinet and placed inside Bester's cell. The cell was set on fire. Bester, meanwhile, made his way out of the prison through the emergency exit, wearing a guard's uniform. 3 prison employees, a night supervisor, and 2 guards who worked in the security camera control room were later fired on suspicion of having helped Bester during the escape, allowing the confusion of the fire to cover his movement. One of them was subsequently charged with murder. When guards discovered the body in Bester's burning cell, the official conclusion was reached almost immediately. The prisoner in the cell had died. He had taken his own life. The Department of Correctional Services issued a statement to the public on the same day declaring that Thabo Bester was dead. No serious questions followed. The fire had done its job, and so Bester simply escaped. He traveled to Johannesburg and moved into a rented mansion in Hyde Park, one of the wealthiest suburbs in the country. Nandifa Magudumana moved in with him. He adopted a new name, TK Nkwana. He was not hiding in the shadows. He was living openly in a luxury home in one of the most affluent neighborhoods in South Africa, while the country believed he was dead. So, Bester and Magudumana kept working together. Together, they set up a company called Aram Properties, presenting it as a legitimate property development and construction business. They took deposits from clients for projects that were never completed. It was, in essence, a con, another fraud operation, run by a man who was supposed to be serving a life sentence and who the government had already declared dead. And this went on for nearly 10 months. The first cracks in the official story began to appear in October of 2022. A journalist named Maricia Damons, a reporter at Groundup, a South African investigative news outlet based in Cape Town, published an article raising specific questions about the investigation into Bester's reported death. The piece noted inconsistencies and gaps in the official account. The response from the Department of Correctional Services was to deny that anything was wrong. Damons kept going. In January of 2023, Groundup published a second article citing the results of a post-mortem examination on the body found in Bester's cell. The results indicated that the person in the cell had been dead before the fire started. That finding alone should have triggered an immediate response. It did not, at least not publicly. In March of 2023, Groundup published a third article, this one co-written by Damons and colleague Daniel Steyn. It laid out evidence directly. Thabo Bester had faked his death, and he had escaped from prison. Police later confirmed a DNA analysis had been conducted, and the results showed that the charred remains in the cell did not belong to Thabo Bester. The South African Police Service announced the findings publicly and said a murder investigation had been opened. A nationwide manhunt was launched. A private security firm, Fidelity, offered a reward of 100,000 rand, equivalent to several thousand US dollars, for information leading to Bester's arrest. By the time the manhunt went public, Bester and Magudumana had already left Johannesburg. In fact, they were already out of South Africa. On the 8th of April, 2023, Tanzanian authorities arrested both of them in Arusha, a city in northern Tanzania, near the Kenyan border. They were arrested together with a Mozambican national named Zakaria Alberto. They were approximately 10 kilometers from the Kenyan border when they were caught. Bester was in possession of an American passport in the name of Tom Williams Kelly. He was deported back to South Africa along with Magudumana within days. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola confirmed their return at a press conference in Cape Town on the 13th of April, 2023. Bester was transferred directly to Kigosi Mampuru Central Maximum Correctional Facility in Pretoria, the country's administrative capital, where the Department of Correctional Services placed him under 24-hour surveillance and direct contact with senior officials at all times. The department made clear, publicly, that a second escape would not be possible. Magudumana was taken into custody as well. Her application for bail was denied. She was charged with arson, assisting an inmate to escape, corruption, defeating the ends of justice, fraud, harboring and concealing an escaped prisoner, and violation of a dead body. Her father, Zolile Sekeleni, was also charged in connection with the escape, specifically in relation to the murder of Katlego Mfolo. A prison guard was similarly charged with murder. In total, by mid-2023, 12 people had been charged in connection with Bester's escape. In addition to continuing to serve time for the rape and murder convictions from 2012, Bester now faced charges of violating a corpse, fraud, escaping lawful custody, and defeating the ends of justice. The prosecution indicated the full trial would take at least 24 weeks to complete, but the case moved slowly, very slowly. Pre-trial hearings stretched through 2023 and into 2024, delayed repeatedly by legal applications, changes in representation, and procedural arguments. The trial itself, which had been set to begin in February of 2025, was postponed again to July of 2025. As of early 2026, the case had still not concluded. Number 2. John Darwin. On the evening of March 21st, 2002, a woman named Anne Darwin called 999 from her home in Seaton, Carew, a small coastal town in the northeast of England, and told the operator she was afraid something dreadful had happened to her husband. He'd gone out on his kayak that morning and hadn't come home. The call set off a huge search and rescue operation along the North Sea coastline. They searched for days. They never found a body. What Anne Darwin didn't tell the operator that night was that she already knew exactly where her husband was, and she'd helped him get there. John Darwin was born in Hartlepool in the early 1950s. He spent most of his working life doing unremarkable things, teaching science and maths at a college in County Durham for 18 years, then a stint at Barclays Bank, then a job as a prison officer at HM Prison Home House. He married Anne Stevenson in 1973, and together they had 2 sons, Mark and Anthony. They lived in Seaton, Carew, where Anne worked as a doctor's receptionist. In December of 2000, they bought 2 more houses in Seaton, Carew. That decision turned out to be a big financial mistake. The mortgages on those 2 properties, on top of everything else they were already carrying, pushed them into a debt of around £64,000. The banks had stopped lending to them. They had no obvious way out, and John Darwin, a man who, by all accounts, could not face the shame of going bankrupt, started talking to Anne about faking his death. Anne later said she tried to talk him out of it. She said she understood he simply couldn't live with the humiliation, but that she couldn't get through to him. Whether that's entirely true is something no one has ever been able to say for certain, because what followed required her full and active participation from the very first day. On the morning of March 21st, 2002, Darwin carried his red kayak down to the water at Seaton, Carew, and paddled out into the North Sea. A neighbor named Howie Russin spotted him from the shore. That would turn out to be the last confirmed sighting of him, or at least that was the plan. That evening, when Darwin didn't show up for his night shift at the prison, Anne made the 999 call and told the operator she feared something dreadful had happened. She was right that something had happened. She just wasn't the grieving wife she was pretending to be. What followed was a massive search operation. What they found, eventually, was the wreckage of Darwin's kayak, smashed up and washed ashore, and a double-ended paddle recovered from the sea, but no body. The North Sea had been unusually calm that day, which puzzled the rescuers. In those conditions, an experienced person on a kayak shouldn't have got into serious trouble. But with no body and no other explanation, there wasn't much else to conclude. John Darwin was listed as missing, and the search was eventually called off. More than a year later, in April of 2003, a maritime death certificate was issued by the Hartlepool coroner. With that certificate in hand, Anne was able to start claiming. Over the following months, she collected £25,000 from a life insurance policy, £25,000 from John's teacher's pension, £58,000 from his prison service pension, £4,000 from the Department of Work and Pensions, and £137,000 from a mortgage insurance policy. Altogether, close to £250,000. The debt was gone, the mortgage was paid off, and somewhere nearby, John Darwin was very much alive. 3 weeks after the kayak wreckage was found, Darwin had quietly returned to Seton Carew. He came back with a newly grown beard, a fake limp, and a new name. He was calling himself Carl Fenwick, a lodger and handyman who worked on the Darwins' rental properties. He moved into the bedsit next door to the family home, the property at number 4, The Cliff, right beside the family house at number 3. And here's the detail that genuinely takes a moment to absorb. The two houses were connected. There was a hidden passageway between them, accessed through a wardrobe with a false back. John Darwin was living next door to his own home, in a room connected to it by a secret door, while his two sons believed he was dead. During the day, he stayed in the bedsit. At night, when the coast was clear, he slipped through the hidden door and lived normally with Anne, sleeping in their bed, eating at their table, going about his life. When Mark or Anthony came to visit their grieving mother, John disappeared back through the wardrobe and waited. Anne would sit with her sons and watch them grieve a man who was 10 feet away. This went on for years. Darwin moved around occasionally. At one point, someone even claimed to have spotted him at a lake in Cornwall, going by yet another name, but mostly he stayed close to home. At some point, a tenant renting one of the Darwin properties took a look at this so-called Carl Fenwick and recognized him. He asked Darwin directly, "Aren't you supposed to be dead?" Darwin told him to keep quiet about it. The tenant did. He said later he just didn't want to get involved. By 2004, John and Anne had decided the bedsit arrangement wasn't sustainable long-term. They wanted to actually leave, build a new life somewhere else, somewhere far away where nobody would recognize them. They considered Cyprus first, and even visited in November of 2004 to look at property. Around that time, Darwin sorted out a fake passport. He got it using the identity of a baby from Sunderland who had been born in 1950 and died at just 5 weeks old. The name on the passport was John Jones. The address he listed on the application was, remarkably, his own real home address in Seton Carew. Eventually, Cyprus didn't work out, and they turned their attention to Panama. They visited several times. In March of 2007, they formed a company called Jaguar Properties and bought a 2-bedroom apartment in a Panama City neighborhood called El Dorado for £50,000. A couple of months later, they went further and bought a £200,000 tropical estate in the village of Escobal, near the Panama Canal. The plan was to build a hotel there and start fresh, and they might have got away with it, except for one photograph. On July 14th, 2006, John and Anne Darwin visited the offices of a Panama property company to look at apartments. While they were there, the company's agent took a photograph of the couple, a standard promotional photo for their website, showing 2 happy clients posing in the office. The photo went up on the internet, and for over a year, nobody noticed. Then in December of 2007, a Cleveland police investigation into Anne had already quietly begun. A colleague of hers had overheard a suspicious phone call between her and John and reported it. The family home had been sold. Anne had moved to Panama. And then John Darwin made his most baffling decision of the whole 5-year saga. He decided to come back. The plan was for Darwin to walk into a British police station, claim he had amnesia, say he had no idea where he'd been for the past 5 years, and then use the resulting good character letter from police to apply for a Panamanian visa so he and Anne could settle there properly. John was apparently convinced this would work. Anne later said she never expected him to get away with it for a second. On December 1st, 2007, Darwin walked into West End Central Police Station in London and told the officer at the desk, "I think I'm a missing person." He said he had no memory of the previous 5 years. He seemed confused and lost. Police ran his fingerprints. They came back as John Darwin. The man declared dead in 2003. He was arrested on suspicion of fraud. While John was being questioned in England, somebody found the photograph. A woman who had been following the news about Darwin's reappearance sat down at her computer and typed 3 words into Google: John, Ann, Panama. And there it was, a photo on a property company's website showing John and Ann Darwin standing together in a Panama estate agent's office, smiling for the camera. The timestamp said July 2006. At that point, John Darwin had been officially dead for 3 years. She sent it anonymously to Cleveland police and to the Daily Mirror. The Mirror ran it across their front page under the headline, "Canoes This in Panama." Reporters tracked Ann down to her home in Panama City. When a journalist showed her the photograph, she broke down. "Yes, that's him," she said. "My sons will never forgive me." Mark and Anthony released a joint statement through Cleveland police, saying they had gone from the height of elation at finding their father alive to the depths of despair as the full picture emerged. They said they were in an angry and confused state of mind and wanted no further contact with either parent. Ann was arrested at Manchester Airport when she flew back to the UK. Police searched the family home and found the hidden passageway behind the wardrobe. They found evidence of the trips to Panama, the offshore accounts, the fake passport. By March of 2008, John Darwin had pleaded guilty to 7 charges of obtaining cash by deception and 1 passport offense. Ann fought the charges but was found guilty of fraud and money laundering. On July 23, 2008, they were both sentenced at Teesside Crown Court. John got 6 years and 3 months. Ann got 6 years and 6 months. Both John and Ann appealed their sentences. In March of 2009, the Court of Appeal turned them down. They were released from prison in 2011. By then, after 38 years of marriage, they were done. Ann had ended the relationship while they were both still inside. She later wrote a book about the experience called Out of My Depth, moved to a village near Middlesbrough, got a job with the RSPCA, and eventually reconciled with her sons. John Darwin moved to the Philippines. He is reportedly living there today with a second wife, running a market stall. He made one attempt to sell a memoir he had written in prison. It didn't go well. As for the money, the court ordered the pair to repay £679,073 in total, covering everything they had taken through the insurance fraud, pension claims, and property sales. By July of 2015, around £541,000 had been recovered, largely from the sale of the Panama properties. Number 3. Lenin Carballido. Carballido Morales was hiding inside a fortified room at a family member's house on the outskirts of Oaxaca City when police finally found him. The house appeared empty from the outside. No lights, no movement, nothing to suggest anyone was there. But somewhere inside, behind what authorities described as a heavily reinforced space, was the man the Mexican press had started calling the zombie mayor. The man who had faked his own death to escape a rape charge, then turned around and ran for public office and won. It was the night of July 23, 2013, and the story of how things got to that point is one of the more extraordinary cases of institutional fraud Mexico has ever seen. It starts 9 years earlier, on the night of March 25, 2004. That night, in a neighborhood of Oaxaca City called Colonia El Arenal, a woman named Bertha León Santibáñez was gang-raped. When she reported the crime, she named 5 men who had attacked her. One of those men was Leninguer Raimundo Carballido Morales, who would later shorten his name to Lenin Carballido when he decided to go into politics. At the time of the attack, he was just a suspect in a rape case. And for a long time, that's all he was, because the investigation moved slowly. Oaxaca in the mid-2000s was a state with a lot of poverty, a lot of institutional strain, and a justice system that often took years to bring cases to trial. So the months passed, and then the years passed, and Carballido remained free. Then, in October of 2010, the case finally moved forward. On October 12th, a judge from the 5th Criminal Court in Oaxaca signed an arrest warrant for Carballido. 6 years after Bertha León Santibáñez reported what happened to her, the state was finally coming for the man she had named. All authorities had to do was find him and serve the warrant. 8 days after that warrant was signed, a civil registry clerk walked into the system and filed a death certificate. The document stated that Leninguer Carballido had died of a diabetic coma. It was written on a real government form. It carried a real official signature. It was stamped with a real official seal. And here's the part that made it almost impossible to detect. It was filed under a file number that had already been used to register a genuine death in the civil registry. So to anyone who looked at it, it was completely indistinguishable from a legitimate document. It looked exactly like every other death certificate in the system. The clerk who produced it was a man named Abel de la Rosa Santos. He worked inside the civil registry office. He had access to the forms, the stamps, the seals, and the filing system. And at some point before that certificate was filed, someone had paid him to use all of it. That someone was Carballido himself. After the fake death certificate was filed, a public prosecutor agent named Cecilia Edith Carrasco formally notified the Fifth Criminal Court that the man they were looking for was dead. Under Mexican law, you cannot prosecute a deceased person. The court had no procedure for verifying whether the certificate was authentic. It came through the right channels, it had the right paperwork, it looked exactly as it should, so the court accepted it. The arrest warrant was canceled, and by January of 2011, the charges against Lenin Carballido Morales in the rape case of Bertha Leon Santibáñez were formally dropped. He was, on paper, a dead man. And for a dead man, that meant he was free. What he did next is something investigators still find hard to explain, because most people who go through the trouble of faking their own death do so because they want to disappear. But Carballido decided to do the opposite. 3 years after faking his death, he walked into the offices of a political party called the PRD and registered as their candidate for the municipal election in San Agustin Amatengo. Instead of using a fake name, he ran as Lenin Carballido, a slightly shortened version of the same name that appeared on his birth certificate, on his death certificate, and in the criminal case file that had been closed when he died. To register as a candidate, he had to submit paperwork, a birth certificate, proof of residency, and a letter confirming he had no criminal record. And technically, that letter was accurate, because when the rape case was closed in 2011, the criminal record associated with it disappeared along with it. The system had no open case against him. As far as the government database was concerned, there was nothing to flag. So he registered, and then he campaigned. Openly and visibly. He showed up at community meetings in a village of 1,400 people. He had banners printed with his own photograph on them and put them up all across town. And on July 7th, 2013, he won the election for mayor of San Agustin Amatengo. For a few days, it looked like it was actually going to work. But then the death certificate resurfaced. Within days of the election results being announced, the document bearing the full name, Lenin Carballido, and listing his cause of death as a diabetic coma, was in the hands of both journalists and prosecutors. Someone had put the pieces together. A man who was legally dead had just won a public election, and now everyone could see both documents side by side. The Oaxaca State Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation immediately. The director of the Public Records Office, a woman named Haiti Reyes Soto, confirmed publicly that the death certificate had been produced using authentic government materials, which is exactly why it had gone undetected for 3 years. The PRD, Carballido's own party, put out a statement saying they had been completely deceived. The state party leader told reporters that when Carballido registered as a candidate, everything looked legitimate. He said Carballido had managed to fool the prosecutor's office, the records office, and the electoral authorities, all at the same time. The state attorney general's office announced it would pursue charges regardless of the election outcome, and that even if Carballido was formally sworn in as mayor, they would still come after him. They also confirmed that the statute of limitations on the original rape charge had not expired, meaning they intended to revive that case as well. Carballido stopped answering his phone. He didn't make a statement, and sometime in the days that followed, he went into hiding. On the night of July 23rd, that was the night police tracked him down and arrested him. The clerk who had made the fake certificate, Abel de la Rosa Santos, was arrested the same night. 7 days later, on July 30th, 2013, a judge issued a formal imprisonment order against both men. Carballido was charged with false judicial declarations, use of a fraudulent document, and violation of legal guarantees. He was remanded to a prison called the Reclusorio de Santa Maria Ixcotel in Oaxaca to await trial. De la Rosa Santos, the clerk who had produced the certificate, was charged with abuse of authority, document falsification, and use of a false document. Number 4. Sharaban K. At some point in the summer of 2022, A young woman in Munich sat down and started scrolling through Instagram looking for someone to kill. She was looking for a specific target, a woman who looked enough like her that, after a violent death, the body could be mistaken for hers. She created fake accounts so no one would know who she was, and she started reaching out, one by one, to young women whose photos matched what she was looking for. Dark hair, similar complexion, similar build. She contacted at least 24 women before she found her target, a 23-year-old lady named Khadija. The woman doing the searching was Sharaban K. Under German law, her full surname can't be publicly released. She was 23 years old, German Iraqi, from a Yazidi community originally from northern Iraq, and she had been living in Munich for some time. She ran a beauty blog, posted content online, and to most people around her seemed like a normal young woman building a life for herself in Germany. But behind that, she was dealing with something she felt she couldn't find a way out of. A broken marriage, serious conflict within her family, pressure from her community that had become unbearable. At some point, she decided the only solution was to vanish completely. She wanted everyone to believe she was dead. And for that to work, someone actually had to die. The woman she eventually settled on was Khadija, a 23-year-old Algerian, living in the city of Heilbronn about 100 miles from Ingolstadt. Khadija was also a beauty blogger. She had a TikTok following, posted makeup content regularly, and was by every account a warm and trusting person. She and Sharaban had never crossed paths before. The only reason Sharaban chose her was that she looked like her. She had dark hair, similar skin tone, similar features. Similar enough that, in the right circumstances, one could be mistaken for the other. Sharaban's first attempt to get Khadija to meet her didn't work, and the reason it didn't is worth knowing because it very nearly saved Khadija's life. Sharaban reached out to her through a fake account, pretending to be a representative of a well-known German rapper named Loon. The pitch was that Khadija had been selected to appear in an upcoming music video, a big opportunity for a young content creator. Khadija was interested, but she was also suspicious, so she did something smart. She went directly to Loon's actual account and sent her a voice message asking if the offer was real. Loon wrote back straight away, "It's fake, sister. Don't answer." So Khadija didn't take the bait. She had good instincts, and if things had ended there, she would still be alive. But Sharaban didn't give up. She came back with a different offer, this time, free beauty products. It was a much simpler pitch, and it worked. Khadija agreed to meet. On August 16th, 2022, Sharaban and her boyfriend, a 24-year-old Kosovan man named Shakir K, drove to Heilbronn and picked Khadija up. The plan, as far as Khadija knew, was that they were heading to Ingolstadt together for the meetup. The three of them got in the car and started driving. Somewhere in the stretch of woodland between the two cities, Khadija was asked to step out of the car. No one knows exactly what they said to get her out of the car, but once she was out, they stabbed her, more than 50 times. Her face was targeted, deliberately disfigured to the point where identifying her would be as difficult as possible. After it was done, they put Khadija's body in the back seat of Sharaban's black Mercedes. They drove back to Ingolstadt and parked the car on a quiet residential street near the Danube River, not far from Shakir's flat. They parked it somewhere it would be found. Then they walked away. Before she left for Ingolstadt that day, Sharaban had told her family she was going to visit her ex-husband. When she didn't come home that evening and stopped answering her phone, her parents got worried and drove to the city to look for her. They found the Mercedes. Inside, they saw the body of a young dark-haired woman who had been brutally murdered, and they identified her as their daughter. Police responded to the scene on the evening of August 16th and issued a statement describing a young woman as the victim of a violent crime. The working assumption was that Sharaban K had been killed. And as far as everyone could tell, a murder victim was lying in a car by the river, and the killer was still out there. But when the autopsy results came back, police said they had massive doubts about the identity of the woman in that car. The body didn't match Sharaban's records closely enough. A DNA test was ordered, and the DNA confirmed what the autopsy had suggested. The woman in that Mercedes was not Sharaban, she was Khadija, a 23-year-old beauty blogger from Heilbronn who had gone to meet someone she thought was a fellow content creator and never made it home. Police noted publicly that the two women looked strikingly alike, similar complexion, straight dark hair, and the heavy makeup found on the body at the time of discovery had made the initial misidentification easier to believe. Sharaban had chosen well. The plan had almost worked. While the autopsy was turning the case upside down, Sharaban had made a critical mistake. She was still in Ingolstadt. And on the night of August 17th, less than 24 hours after the body was found, someone spotted her at a local pizzeria. Police got the tip, moved quickly, and arrested both Sharaban and Schrenker that same night. The woman who was supposed to be dead was sitting in a restaurant less than a mile from where her victim's body had been found. As the investigation deepened, something else came out during the trial that added another layer to the picture of who Sharaban really was. Prosecutors alleged that at some point before the murder, she had also tried to hire someone to kill her brother-in-law. The murder for hire never happened. The person she approached didn't go through with it, but the attempt itself was serious enough that the court added it to the charges against her. The trial began in January of 2024 at Ingolstadt Regional Court. It lasted 11 months and required more than 50 days of hearings. On December 19, 2024, the verdict came in. Both Sharaban and Schrenker were found guilty of murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison. The court ruled that Sharaban's guilt carried what German law describes as particular severity, meaning that early release after 15 years, which is standard in German life sentences, is considered unlikely in her case. As of today, Sharaban is sitting in a prison in Germany with almost no chance of ever walking free. Number 5. Ari Squire. On the morning of February 23, 2008, a garage caught fire at a house in Lake Barrington, Illinois. Firefighters arrived to find a body pinned under a collapsed pickup truck. A wallet in the victim's jeans identified him as the homeowner, a 40-year-old man named Ari Squire. The initial conclusion was straightforward. A terrible accident had happened, and a man was crushed under his own truck while working alone in his garage. What investigators did not know yet was that the man in that garage was not Ari Squire. Ari Squire was alive. He had staged the entire scene himself, murdered a stranger to use as his body double, and was already hundreds of miles away, running on a dead man's identity and counting on a $5 million life insurance payout to fund the rest of his life. The story starts several months earlier, in the financial hole that Ari Squire had spent years digging for himself. Squire lived in Lake Barrington, a comfortable suburb about 40 miles northwest of Chicago. He had a large home, a wife named Denise, and a garage big enough to house the diesel trucks he collected and raced as a hobby. To people who knew him casually, he looked like a man who had things figured out. But behind all that, Ari Squire was in serious trouble. Between 1998 and 2001, he had been running an in-home healthcare company and submitting fraudulent Medicare claims, billing the government for services that were never actually provided. The total came to $2.3 million. In December of 2007, he pleaded guilty to Medicare fraud. He was sentenced to probation and house arrest and ordered to pay $200,000 in restitution, on top of a separate $126,000 civil settlement from an earlier related case. His new construction business, which he had started after the healthcare company collapsed, was failing badly in the 2008 housing crisis. Work had dried up, the money was gone, and the premiums on his $5 million life insurance policy were about to quadruple to $12,000 a year. That life insurance policy was the only thing Ari Squire had left that was worth anything. He had taken it out back in August of 1999, and in December of 2006, he had quietly updated the beneficiaries. He designated 80% of the payout, $4 million, to his wife Denise. The remaining 20%, $1 million, went to his best friend and business partner, a man named Joseph Vaccaro. The plan, according to investigators, was that once Squire was officially declared dead and the money paid out, Denise and Vaccaro would funnel portions of it back to him so he could start a new life somewhere else under a completely different identity. The only problem was that to collect on a life insurance policy, someone actually has to die, and Ari Squire had no intention of it being him. What he needed was a body. Specifically, he needed a body that could pass as his, someone close enough to his height and build, with similar enough features that even after a fire, investigators would look at the remains and conclude it was him. So sometime in early 2008, Squire started making regular visits to a Home Depot store in Lake Zurich, Illinois. Not to buy anything. He was there to find someone to kill. He would approach employees, strike up conversations, and start asking questions that had nothing to do with construction or home improvement. He asked about eye color. He asked about tattoos, whether they had any, and where exactly on the body. He asked about bank account details and PIN numbers. He needed someone who could pass for him, and he was willing to take his time finding the right person. His first choice was a man named Sandy Lively. Lively was a carpenter who worked at that Home Depot and happened to share Squire's interest in diesel trucks. They had similar hair and similar facial features, and people who later saw photographs of both men said that when they both had beards, they looked nearly identical. Squire offered him $60,000 a year, and Lively was ready to take it. But something about the questions bothered him: the inquiries about tattoos, the requests for banking details, the level of personal information Squire seemed to need before any work had even started. He grew suspicious. He delayed the meeting, kept pushing it back, and on the morning they were finally supposed to get together, Sandy Lively overslept. That was the same morning the fire broke out at Squire's garage. Lively found out later, when investigators sat him down and walked him through what had been planned, exactly how close he had come. He later said that when he and Squire both had beards, they looked identical. Almost. Because Lively hadn't shown up, Squire had needed a second option. He found one at the same Home Depot. His name was Justin Newman. Newman was 20 years old, from Arlington Heights, a town just south of Lake Barrington. He worked as a cashier at Home Depot, earning $10 an hour, and he was using that money to help support his single mother, a woman named Donna Fiorito. He had brown hair and blue eyes, and a build similar enough to Squire's to work. Squire approached him at the store, offered him a construction job paying $15 an hour, twice what he was currently making, and promised mentorship and a real career in the trades. For Justin Newman, it sounded like exactly the break he had been looking for. He told his mother about the interview before he left. On the morning of February 23, 2008, he drove to the house in Lake Barrington for what he believed was a job interview. He was never seen alive again. What happened inside that garage is based on what investigators were able to reconstruct afterward. Police believe Squire incapacitated Newman with chloroform once he had him inside. He then moved the body under the white Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck and let it fall on him. He dressed Newman in his own clothes, placed his wallet, his keys, and his driver's license on the body, poured accelerant around the scene, left a propane torch burning, and set the garage on fire. Then he walked out, got into Newman's car, and drove south. Around 9 that morning, Denise Squire called 911. Firefighters arrived to find her standing in the yard. Inside, under the collapsed truck, was the body. The wallet said it was Ari Squire. Lake County Sheriff Sergeant John Lucas, one of the first investigators on the scene, later said it looked to him like an accidental fire. Nothing about it initially suggested otherwise. The garage electricity had been switched off, which meant a light bulb could not have ignited anything, eliminating one possible accidental explanation. There were no jack stands under the truck, which was unusual for an experienced mechanic who knew exactly what he was doing. The scene smelled of an accelerant, despite the fact that Squire had supposedly been working on a diesel truck, which doesn't run on gasoline. And there was a lit propane torch at the scene, with no obvious mechanical purpose. Then the coroner began examining the body. The victim appeared to be around 20 years old, not 40. The body was missing the healed arm fracture that Squire had sustained in a previous accident. There was no tribal tattoo on the shoulder, which Squire was known to have, and when dental records were submitted by Denise and compared against the remains, they didn't match. Dr. Richard Keller, the Lake County coroner, confirmed it directly. The individual in that garage was not Ari Squire. Around the same time, Squire's business partner contacted investigators. He had learned that a young man Squire had recently hired had gone missing on the same day as the fire. When investigators spoke to Donna Fiorito, Justin Newman's mother, she told them about the job interview, about the morning he had left, and about the text message that had arrived afterward. The one that didn't sound like him. "I'm in Missouri, call you next week." She said Justin had never texted like that in his life. She had already reported him missing. Investigators pulled the phone records. Justin's cell phone had pinged near the Squire residence on the morning of February 23rd. His own car had never moved, and DNA testing later confirmed what the dental records had already suggested. The body in Squire's garage was Justin Newman. He had been murdered before the fire was set. The cause of death was blunt force trauma and burns. But while all of that was happening, investigators were also looking at something that made no sense at all. In the days after the fire, after Ari Squire had been officially declared dead, his wife Denise had been receiving emails from his account. The messages asked about the funeral arrangements. "When will my ashes be returned to you?" one of them read. "When are you planning on dispersing my ashes?" Denise had written back casually, as if she were corresponding with someone who was very much alive. She later told investigators she thought the messages had been written before Ari died and scheduled to send automatically on a delay. Investigators never believed her. She had been talking to detectives every single day since the fire and had never once mentioned them, not until she found out that investigators were about to seize the computers from the house. Denise had also organized a memorial dinner at a restaurant called Maggiano's Little Italy in Skokie. 120 people attended to pay their respects to Ari Squire. Ari Squire, at that moment, was alive and driving through Missouri in Justin Newman's red Pontiac Sunfire. He had dyed his hair brown and bought blue contact lenses, both chosen specifically to match the description on Newman's driver's license. He was using Newman's credit cards and cell phone. He was living as Justin Newman, and as far as he was concerned, the plan was still in motion. On February 29th, a police officer in Eureka, Missouri, ran a routine license plate check on vehicles in the parking lot of a Days Inn motel. One of the plates came back registered to a red Pontiac Sunfire belonging to Justin Newman, who was flagged in the missing persons database. Officers checked the hotel records. Someone using Newman's name had checked into room 133. On March 2nd, 2008, officers knocked on the door of room 133. There was no response. They knocked again and called out. From inside the room, a single gunshot rang out. When police got the door open, Ari Squire was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Scattered around the room were Justin Newman's cell phone, his ID, his credit cards, and his car keys. Fingerprints confirmed the dead man's identity. Lake County Sheriff Mark Curran, speaking publicly about the case in the days that followed, described Ari Squire as an evil, sadistic human being without a conscience. In August of 2008, Denise Squire filed a claim for the $5 million life insurance policy. Fidelity Investments Life Insurance Company investigated, learned of her implication in the murder, and refused to pay. The case went to civil court. A jury found Denise Squire civilly liable for Justin Newman's wrongful death, concluding that she had been aware of her husband's plan. Denise was never criminally charged. Lake County investigators turned their findings over to the FBI and federal prosecutors, but no criminal charges were ever filed against her. Number 6. Marcus Schrenker. On the evening of January 11th, 2009, a private pilot flying over Alabama made a distress call to air traffic control. His name was Marcus Schrenker. He said his windshield had imploded, that he was bleeding profusely. He said he wasn't going to make it. Controllers tried to get him to divert to a nearby airfield. He didn't respond. Military jets were scrambled to intercept the aircraft. When they reached the plane and got close enough to see inside, there was no one there. The cockpit was empty. The door was open. The plane was flying itself on autopilot. Marcus Schrenker had already jumped out with a parachute, and somewhere below him in the dark, he was falling toward what he hoped was a brand new life. Why Marcus Schrenker jumped out of a perfectly good plane at 24,000 feet has everything to do with the life he had built and how quickly it was coming apart. Schrenker grew up in Merrillville, Indiana, attended Purdue University, and eventually built a career as a financial advisor in Indianapolis. He ran several investment companies, and he was good at selling himself. He was confident, and he knew exactly what to say to people who had worked their whole lives to build up savings and were now looking for someone trustworthy to manage that money. He specifically targeted airline pilots, people with solid retirement accounts who needed someone to handle their investments. By the mid-2000s, Schrenker looked like everything was going well. He and his wife Michelle lived in a $1 million waterfront home in Geist, the kind of neighborhood where people socialized on boats and called it Cocktail Cove. He owned his own plane. He drove a Lexus. His family did an ad for a local car dealership. He was the picture of success. What his clients didn't know was that one of the main funds he was putting their money into didn't exist. He had invented it. The money they handed over wasn't being invested. It was going into his pocket. He was charging excessive commissions on top of that, sometimes as high as 13% on client trades. Over time, the total losses to his investors added up to somewhere north of $9 million. He used the money to pay for the house, the plane, the cars, the lifestyle. And for a while, he got away with it. Then, on December 30th, 2008, his wife Michelle filed for divorce. She had found out about an affair he had been having with a woman at the airport where he kept his plane. The next day, his Indiana financial advisor license expired, and on that same day, all three of his companies were searched under warrant as part of ongoing fraud investigations. At the start of January 2009, the Indiana Department of Insurance filed a motion to revoke his license, citing a long list of client complaints, some of which included allegations that he had forged signatures and withdrawn investment money in ways that caused massive financial penalties to his clients. A Maryland court had just ordered him to pay over $533,000 in a separate case. At least 8 lawsuits had been filed against him over the previous decade. In the space of about 2 weeks, Marcus Schrenker's entire world collapsed at once. The divorce, the investigations, the lawsuits, the license, all of it coming down at the same time. And rather than face any of it, he decided to disappear. The plan, as far as investigators could reconstruct it, was this. He would take off in his plane, make a fake distress call, set the aircraft to fly itself, then parachute out over Alabama. Without a body, the assumption would be that he had died in the crash. He had a motorcycle stashed in a storage unit in Alabama under a fake name, ready to go. He had cash. He had maps. He had thought this through, or at least he thought he had. On the evening of January 11th, 2009, Schrenker took off alone from an airfield in Anderson, Indiana, in his single-engine turboprop Piper Meridian. The stated destination was Destin, Florida. Somewhere over Alabama, around 35 miles southwest of Birmingham, he got on the radio and made his distress call. Then he set the plane to autopilot, leveled it off at about 3,500 feet, opened the door, and jumped. Military jets were scrambled and caught up with the aircraft over Alabama. The pilots could see the open door and the empty cockpit. They stayed with the plane as it continued flying south on autopilot, crossing over into Florida. Eventually, it ran out of fuel and came down in a swampy wooded area near the Blackwater River in East Milton, Florida, a residential zone where it missed a row of houses by about 50 to 75 yards. When investigators got to the wreckage, they looked for blood. There was none. They examined the windshield. It was completely intact. No imploded glass. No sign of any emergency at all. Inside the aircraft, they found a United States atlas and a campground directory, both of which had the Florida and Alabama sections dog-eared and highlighted. Schrenker, meanwhile, had landed in a field somewhere in rural Alabama. He pulled out of the dark, walked to a nearby road, and a few hours later showed up outside a store in the small town of Childersburg, Alabama, about 220 miles north of where the plane went down. A local police officer was there. Schrenker was wet from the knees down, no visible injuries. He told the officer he had been in a canoeing accident with some friends. He showed his Indiana driving license. The officer had no reason to question the story, drove him to a nearby motel, and left him there. When news came through about a plane going down in Florida, registered to a Marcus Schrenker from Indiana, officers went back to the motel. The room was empty. He had already picked up the motorcycle from the storage unit, put on a black cap, and disappeared into the woods. The manhunt that followed covered multiple states and lasted 3 days. It was national news. Schrenker had apparently been reading about himself online from somewhere on the road. A neighbor back in Indiana received an email from someone identifying themselves as Schrenker, saying he had been following the coverage and was disturbed by what was being reported and wanted to set the record straight. He never did. On January 13th, 2009, 2 days after the crash, U.S. Marshals found him at a campsite near Quincy, Florida, not far from Tallahassee. He was inside a tent. He had slashed his left wrist and had a second wound near his elbow. He was barely conscious and had lost a significant amount of blood. A marshal who was present later recalled that Schrenker was barely able to speak and that among the words he managed to say, he mentioned the word die at least twice while they were giving him first aid. He was airlifted to Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. He survived. Found with him at the campsite were knives, a laptop, clothes, toiletries, and maps. The parachute he had jumped with had already been recovered, and the parachute's serial number was traced directly back to Schrenker. In June of 2009, Schrenker pleaded guilty to federal charges of destroying an aircraft and causing the U.S. Coast Guard to respond when no help was actually needed. In August of that year, a federal judge sentenced him to 4 years and 3 months in prison. He was also ordered to pay $34,000 in restitution to the Coast Guard and over $871,000 to Harley-Davidson Credit Corporation, the company that held the lien on the plane he had destroyed, but the federal case was only part of it. The state of Indiana had been building its own case while the federal proceedings were underway. In August of 2009, Schrenker was charged with 11 felony counts related to his financial activities. In September of 2010, he reached a plea deal with Indiana prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of securities fraud. As part of the deal, he agreed to pay more than $630,000 in restitution to the investors he had defrauded. On October 7, 2010, Hamilton Superior Court Judge Stephen Nation sentenced Schrenker to 10 years in prison for the securities fraud and ordered that those 10 years run consecutively with his existing federal sentence. He was looking at more than 14 years behind bars in total. At his plea hearing, Schrenker told the judge he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been taking medication for it since 1992. His attorney noted afterward that Schrenker was not using the diagnosis to excuse what he had done. By the time the civil claims were totaled up, the amount being sought from him across all cases was somewhere around $20 million. The liquidation of everything he owned brought in less than $600,000. The investors who had trusted him got back roughly 7 cents on every dollar they had lost. One of those investors was a commercial airline pilot named Dave Smith, who had flown for Delta for nearly 30 years and handed his entire retirement savings over to Schrenker based on a colleague's recommendation. Marcus Schrenker was released from prison after serving his sentences. In 2025, he broke a long public silence, appearing on a podcast where he reflected on what he had done, expressing regret about the harm caused to investors and to his family. He has never fully repaid what he owes. Number 7. Nicholas Rossi. On a December night in 2021, staff at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow, Scotland, were treating a patient who called himself Arthur Knight. He was admitted with a severe case of COVID-19. He was frail, dependent on oxygen, and by all appearances a very sick man. But something about him had caught the attention of the medical staff, specifically the tattoos. One of them, on his shoulder, was the crest of Brown University. There was an Interpol notice circulating at the time with photographs of a wanted American fugitive with that same tattoo. Staff quietly alerted the authorities, and the man who had spent nearly 2 years pretending to be a terminally ill Irish orphan who had never set foot in the United States was placed under arrest in his hospital bed. His real name was Nicholas Oliverdian. He also went by Nicholas Rossi, the name of his adoptive stepfather. Over the years, investigators found he had used at least 10 different identities, possibly more. But to the 2 women he had raped in Utah in 2008, he was simply the man who had never been held accountable, until now. Nicholas Oliverdian was born on July 11, 1987, in Providence, Rhode Island. He had a difficult childhood by any measure. He later alleged that his parents were abusive and that he was placed into the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth and Families at a young age. While in that system, he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and attention deficit disorder at Butler Hospital. He moved through various placements, and eventually, he was placed fully under state care. After leaving foster care, he got a job at the Rhode Island State House, starting out in a junior role, and later working as a legislative aide. Over time, he became a public figure. He spoke openly about the abuse he said he had gone through. He organized rallies, held press conferences, and filed a federal lawsuit against the state's child welfare system, alleging negligence and misconduct. That lawsuit was eventually settled. Rhode Island waived about $200,000 in medical debt he owed, but the full details were never made public. To many people in Rhode Island, he came across as articulate, convincing, and committed to helping children who had been failed by the system. He was believed and respected. That public persona, it turned out, was running parallel to something else entirely. In January of 2008, Nicholas was 20 years old and had moved to Dayton, Ohio. He met a woman named Mary Grabinski through MySpace. While walking her to class at a local community college, he cornered and sexually assaulted her. He was charged with public indecency and sexual imposition and convicted of sex-related offenses in Ohio. At the time, it looked like a minor case. Nobody knew yet that it was just the beginning. That same year, back in Utah, he raped 2 different women in 2 completely separate incidents. The first was a 26-year-old woman in Salt Lake County, a former girlfriend he had met through a Craigslist personal ad while she was recovering from a traumatic brain injury. She later testified that he had asked her to pay for their dates, lend him money so he wouldn't be evicted, and take on debt to buy their engagement rings. She said he became controlling and verbally abusive shortly after they got engaged. One night, after she drove him home, he raped her in his bedroom. The second victim was a 21-year-old woman in Orem, about 40 miles south of Salt Lake City. She had been dating him for a while before breaking up with him when he became controlling and stole money from her. She went back to his apartment to try to recover what he owed her. He raped her there. Both women reported what happened to the police, but neither case went anywhere. The Orem case was particularly frustrating. The lead investigator later testified that she had intended to pursue charges, but ultimately felt there wasn't enough evidence to proceed. The rape kit collected from the Orem victim was submitted to the Utah State Crime Lab and sat there, untested, for nearly a decade. Nicholas, meanwhile, continued building his public profile. He kept showing up in Rhode Island, political circles, kept pushing his child welfare work, kept building his reputation. The state had a warrant out for him for failing to register as a sex offender, but that warrant didn't stop him from moving through public life freely for years. Then in 2017, 2 things happened almost at the same time, and together they would change everything for Nicholas. The first was that Nicholas quietly packed up and left the United States. He flew to Dublin, Ireland in June of that year. The timing wasn't random. Around the same time, a charity foundation he had started to help abused children was being looked into by the FBI in Ohio for suspected fraud. He got himself an Irish driver's license under the name Nicholas Brown. Irish authorities later confirmed it was a fake, put together using someone else's stolen identity. The second happened back in Utah. The state started working through a massive backlog of rape kits that had been sitting in storage for years, some of them for over a decade. One of those kits belonged to the woman in Orem. In 2018, the results came back. The DNA matched a profile already in the system, the same one collected during the Ohio case 10 years earlier. Nicholas Oliverdian was now a confirmed suspect. A sealed arrest warrant was issued in Utah in September of 2020, but 2 months before that warrant was signed, Nicholas Oliverdian was already dead. At least, that's what an obituary published online in February of 2020 said. According to the obituary, he had died of late-stage non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a type of blood cancer. It said he passed on February 29th, a date that only exists once every 4 years. It painted a peaceful picture, his wife and children by his bedside, his extended family around him, and it gave him a dramatic final line: "Fear not, and run toward the bliss of the sun." It was, by all standards, a well-crafted piece of writing. It sounded like the kind of obituary a person with a facility for language and self-presentation might write about themselves. But nobody who actually knew Nicholas believed it for a second. The Rhode Island State Police didn't buy it. His former lawyer didn't buy it. The family who had fostered him years earlier didn't buy it either. The whole obituary read like something he wrote about himself. And the FBI had already been tracking him anyway, following his cell phone records and his iCloud account, which had been quietly logging his life abroad the whole time. Then came the phone call to the church. Shortly after the obituary went up, a priest at a Catholic church in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, got a call from a woman who said she was Nicholas's widow. She wanted to arrange a funeral mass for him. The priest later said her voice was strangely high-pitched. He described it as sounding like a character from a British sitcom. Before anything could be arranged, a state police detective called the church and told the priest to cancel it. Nicholas wasn't dead, the detective said. He was a fugitive, and that woman on the phone was almost certainly Nicholas himself, using a voice changer. By that point, he had settled in Glasgow, going by the name Arthur Knight, with what appeared to be a wife and a whole new life built around him. For nearly 2 years, it held together. Then he got COVID-19 badly enough that he had to be admitted to hospital, and that's where the tattoos gave him away. He was formally arrested at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital on December 13th, 2021, on charges relating to the Utah rape case. When police came for him, he told them his name was Arthur Knight. He was Irish, He had never been to America. He was a victim of mistaken identity, and he could prove it. What followed was one of the most prolonged identity disputes in recent criminal history. Nicholas appeared in early court hearings in Scotland in a wheelchair, wearing an oxygen mask, speaking with a British accent, and claiming to be a terminally ill orphan who was being framed by American authorities. When his lawyers asked the Scottish courts to hold his extradition hearings under the name Arthur Knight, the courts complied pending the identity determination. He gave media interviews insisting on his innocence. He claimed at one point that investigators had tattooed him while he was in a coma at the hospital. The same tattoos that had identified him, he said, had been placed there by corrupt hospital employees. Scottish judge Norman McFadyen later described these claims as implausible and fanciful. In February of 2022, Sky News arranged a video call between Oliverdian and a former Rhode Island state representative named Coogan, who had known him personally for over 20 years. Oliverdian claimed not to know who Coogan was. When Coogan began mentioning specific details, scars, tattoos, shared memories, the video call was ended abruptly. On November 11, 2022, Edinburgh Sheriff Court ruled that the man before them was Nicholas Rossi. Judge McFadyen said he was satisfied on the balance of probabilities based on fingerprint evidence, photographic evidence, tattoo evidence, and the documented pattern of changing names. On January 5, 2024, Nicholas Oliverdian was extradited to the United States. He arrived in Utah still insisting he was Arthur Knight. That position finally collapsed on August 23, 2024, when he abandoned the mistaken identity claim in a Utah courtroom. And on October 16, 2024, during a bail hearing, he formally admitted for the first time that he had faked his death. He told the court he had done it because of credible death threats from elected officials in Rhode Island connected to his foster care advocacy work. The judge found him a flight risk and denied bail. He has been in custody ever since. His first trial began on August 11, 2025, in Salt Lake County. His second trial followed in September, in the 4th District Court in Provo. After deliberating for approximately 5 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on a second count of first-degree felony rape. On October 20, 2025, District Judge Barry Lawrence sentenced Rossi to 5 years to life in the Utah State Prison for the Salt Lake County conviction. On November 4, 2025, Judge Derek Pullen sentenced Rossi to a second term of 5 years to life for the Utah County conviction. He ordered the two sentences to run consecutively, meaning Rossi must serve a minimum of 10 years before the Board of Pardons and Parole can first consider his release. Number 8. Russell Cosley. In October of 1993, a distress call came in from a yacht called Le Talon Noir, somewhere in the English Channel between the island of Guernsey and the coast of France. A man had gone overboard. His name was Russell Cosley. Search and rescue teams swept the area looking for him. They found nothing. Within days, a life insurance claim worth around £790,000 was filed on his behalf. The insurance investigator who picked up that claim didn't believe it for a second. And what he started digging into didn't just expose a staged drowning, it opened up a murder case that had been sitting cold for 8 years. The story starts in Bournemouth, a coastal city on the south coast of England. Russell lived there with his wife Carol and their teenage daughter Samantha. Russell and Carol both worked in the aviation industry. Everything about the family seemed fine from the outside, but inside that house, it was a completely different story. Russell had been having an affair with a woman named Patricia, a work colleague about 14 years younger than Carol. In 1984, he moved Patricia into the family home. His explanation to Carol and Samantha was that she had nowhere else to live. Samantha was a teenager at the time. She later described the first few months as weirdly normal. Patricia was almost like a nanny figure to her. But gradually it became impossible to ignore what was actually going on. Russell was having an open affair under the same roof as his wife. Carol knew exactly what the situation was, and by the summer of 1985, she had clearly reached her limit. The last confirmed sighting of Carol Packman was at a solicitor's office, where she had gone to ask about filing for divorce. That was June of 1985. She was never seen again. On June 14th, Samantha and her father came home to find a short note on the kitchen table. Carol's wedding ring was sitting next to it. The note said, "I've had enough and I'm leaving. I'm not coming back." Samantha was 16 years old. Her parents' marriage had been falling apart for a while. and her father told her that her mom had simply gone off to start a new life somewhere else. Over time, the story kept changing. To some people, he said she had driven off with a man in a red Porsche. To others, she was living in Canada, or France, or Germany. The details never stayed the same, but the point was always the same. She left on her own, and she wasn't coming back. Dorset police looked into it, treated it as a missing person case, and eventually moved on. There was no body, no sign of a crime, just a note and a wedding ring on a kitchen table. There was nothing to push against. And so the case went cold while Russell just got on with his life. He and Patricia left England and moved to Canada, where they both got jobs in the aerospace industry. The problem was that Patricia used Carol's work permit to get into the country, essentially living and working there under Carol's name. For a while it held. But they had worked in the same industry as Carol, and colleagues who knew both women started noticing that something wasn't right. Patricia and Carol were clearly not the same person. The whole thing fell apart and the two of them had to pack up and come back to the UK. Back in England, Russell changed his surname by deed poll in 1989. He dropped Packman, the name he had shared with Carol, and took Patricia's surname instead. He was now Russell Cosley. He wasn't done yet though, because by 1993, Russell had decided he wanted more. He wanted money. He had taken out a substantial life insurance policy worth somewhere around £790,000, and the plan was to fake his own death and collect it. He wasn't going to fake a drowning by actually getting in the water. The plan was much simpler than that. That night, a 40-foot yacht called Le Talon Noir left Guernsey heading toward France. On board were Patricia, Russell's solicitor, Anthony Hackett-Jones, and another woman. Russell wasn't on it. He had already bought himself a one-way ferry ticket back to the English mainland under the surname Russell. Once the boat was out on the water, the crew put out a distress call. A man had gone overboard. His name was Russell Cosley. Search and rescue teams were sent out immediately. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. And while all of that was happening out in the channel, Russell was sitting on a ferry going home. Within days, the life insurance claim landed on an investigator's desk. The investigator wasn't buying it. The ferry passenger records from that night showed a booking under the name Russell. Patricia's account of what happened on the boat kept changing every time she was questioned. Nothing she said quite lined up. The insurance company flagged it as suspicious and brought in the police. Dorset detectives started tracking Patricia's movements, waiting to see where she would lead them. She led them to a pub in Brighton. Detective Paul Donnell, who worked on the case, later recalled the moment plainly. He and colleagues had been following Patricia, and one afternoon she walked into a pub, and there in the corner, sitting quietly, very much alive, was Russell Cosley. He was arrested on the spot. He was charged with fraud and taken into custody. The trial for the staged drowning was held at Southwark Crown Court. In 1995, Russell Cosley was convicted of the insurance fraud and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But something else happened while he was behind bars. Something that turned a fraud case into something far more serious. According to 3 separate fellow inmates, all of whom later testified independently, Russell admitted in prison about what he had done to his wife. He apparently couldn't help himself. One inmate said Russell told him he had killed Carol and disposed of her body. Another claimed he bragged about committing the perfect murder. One account was that he told a fellow prisoner he had gassed Carol and dissolved her body in acid. Dorset police reopened the Carol Packman missing person case while Russell was serving his fraud sentence. They went back over everything. They confirmed that Carol had been to a solicitor about a divorce in the days before she disappeared, and that the solicitor had never seen or heard from her again. They checked with her doctor, her friends, her neighbors. Nobody had had any contact with Carol since June of 1985. There had been no financial activity, no bank withdrawals, no medical records, no trace of her existence anywhere in the world after the day that note appeared on the kitchen table. In 1994, while still in custody, Russell had made a voluntary confession to police. He described an argument with Carol that turned physical. He said he strangled her and burned her body in the garden of their Bournemouth home afterward. He later retracted every word of it and went back to claiming she had left voluntarily. After Russell finished his 2-year fraud sentence, he was charged with the murder of Carol Packman. The trial took place at Winchester Crown Court in December of 1996. He was sentenced to life in prison. Then, in June of 2003, the Court of Appeal quashed the verdict. The concern was about the reliability of the testimony from the fellow prisoners, Jailhouse informants are always a complicated form of evidence, and the appeal court felt the case needed to be heard again with that issue properly addressed. A retrial was ordered. The retrial took place at Exeter Crown Court in the spring of 2004. Russell was convicted again. The judge, Mrs. Justice Hallett, sentenced him to life in prison for the second time. Russell went back to prison, and for the next 2 decades, he served his sentence. In 2020, after serving more than 23 years for the murder, Russell Cosley was released from prison on license. In November of 2021, he was recalled. He had disappeared from a bail hostel overnight and missed a call from his probation officer. He later claimed he had gone to Portsmouth for the day and been attacked and robbed by 3 men. The parole board did not appear to find that story entirely convincing. In January of 2023, the parole board ruled that he could be released again. He walked out of HMP Bristol in February of that year. The Ministry of Justice confirmed he would be subject to strict license conditions for the rest of his life. Number 9. Samuel Israel III. For nearly a decade, Samuel Israel III had been telling his investors that their money was safe, the fund was performing well, and that the returns were consistent. There was nothing to worry about. What those investors didn't know was that the accounting firm auditing the fund was a fake company Israel had created himself, essentially hiring himself to sign off on his own numbers. The $450 million his clients had handed over wasn't being carefully invested. It was being looted. And by the time the whole thing collapsed and a judge handed him 20 years in prison, Israel had already decided he wasn't going. He had a plan. It just wasn't a very good one. Israel was born on July 20th, 1959, in New Orleans, Louisiana. His family had been in finance for generations. His grandfather founded a commodities trading firm that was eventually sold for $42 million. His father was a respected figure in the financial community. Sam grew up surrounded by wealth and Wall Street connections, and when he eventually made his way into the industry himself, he arrived with a built-in credibility that most people spend years trying to earn. He attended a private prep school in New York, then went to Tulane University without graduating. But with the Israel family name behind him, formal qualifications weren't really the point. He got a job as a junior trader at several Wall Street firms, including a small role at a hedge fund run by billionaire Leon Cooperman. None of it went particularly far. But in 1996, Sam Israel did what he had always wanted to do. He launched his own fund. He called it the Bayou Hedge Fund Group. It was based in Stamford, Connecticut, and from the beginning he positioned it as something exclusive and sophisticated. The pitch to investors was bold, a proprietary trading system so effective it could turn $300 million into $4 billion within a decade. That's an annual return of over 30% year after year, regardless of what the broader market was doing. People believed him. Before the fund collapsed, he had raised $450 million from clients who trusted him. The problem was that the system didn't work. In the very first year, 1998, the fund lost money, even while the overall stock market was going up. That should have been the moment Israel came clean to his investors. Well, he didn't. Instead, he and his CFO, a man named Daniel Marino, made a decision that turned a failing fund into a criminal enterprise. They created a fake accounting firm. They called it Richmond Fairfield Associates. It didn't exist as a real business. It was a shell, a name on paper, that they then hired to audit the Bayou Fund. So when investors received their audit reports showing consistent profits and healthy returns, those reports were being signed off by a company that Israel himself had created for exactly that purpose. He was essentially grading his own homework and telling his clients someone independent had checked it, and it worked. For years, clients kept their money in, new clients came in. The fund kept raising money and producing fabricated statements that made everything look fine. Meanwhile, the actual trading was losing money, and the gap between what the statements showed and what was really in the accounts kept growing. Israel also became desperate in a different way during this period. He started looking for ways to actually make the money back, to find some investment so spectacular it would cover the losses and make the whole thing real. That desperation led him somewhere strange. In 2004, he was approached by a man named Robert Booth Nichols, who described himself as a former CIA officer involved in classified government operations. Nichols told Israel about a secret trading market. He said it was only accessible to a select few insiders, where returns of 100% every 2 weeks were apparently achievable. Israel invested $10 million in what turned out to be a high-yield investment fraud scheme. A con artist had conned a con artist. And when Israel wired over $150 million into this scheme, it triggered an FBI investigation. Agents initially approached Israel as a victim, but the more questions they asked, the more they realized something else was going on. An FBI agent who worked the case later said the situation simply didn't make sense. A sophisticated Wall Street investor, someone who should have known better, throwing everything into something that looked this suspicious. Israel was also dealing with serious personal problems throughout this period. He was heavily abusing cocaine. He was going through a series of painful surgeries. The pressure of maintaining a multi-hundred-million-dollar lie while his own health was deteriorating was taking its toll, and all of it was coming apart at once. In 2005, investors who had grown suspicious started demanding their money back. When the requests were turned away, the whole structure began to collapse. On September 29, 2005, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission filed charges against Bayou, Israel, and Daniel Marino. The following year, the fund filed for bankruptcy. And eventually, after cooperating with authorities in hopes of a more lenient outcome, Israel pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit securities and wire fraud. On April 14, 2008, U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison and ordered him to forfeit $300 million. Israel was allowed to remain free for a short time before reporting to prison, due to medical issues that needed attention. He was told to report to a federal facility in Massachusetts on June 9, 2008. Within 2 months, he had changed his mind. The plan he put together required help. His girlfriend at the time was a 45-year-old woman named Deborah Ryan, who lived with him in Armonk, New York. On June 7th, 2 days before he was supposed to report to prison, Israel met Deborah at an auto repair shop in Bedford, New York. Together, they attached a motor scooter to the back of a recreational vehicle. That night, the night before his surrender date, Israel woke Ryan up and told her he needed her help. She helped him pack the RV with his belongings. On June 9th, the morning he was supposed to walk into that prison, Deborah followed Israel in her own car as he drove the RV to a highway rest stop in upstate New York. Once he had parked the RV there, she drove him back to their home in Armonk. Then, Israel got in his own vehicle and drove to the Bear Mountain Bridge. Israel parked the Envoy on the bridge, got out, and with his finger wrote 4 words in the dust on the hood. "Suicide is painless." It's the title of the theme song from the old television series MASH. He left a suicide note in the car. Then he walked away, retrieved the RV from the rest stop, and drove off. He didn't show up at the prison in Massachusetts that day. His car was found on the bridge the next morning. Police searched the Hudson River below for a body. They found nothing. And almost immediately, people who knew Israel started voicing what many of them were already thinking. A lawyer who represented 20 investors who had lost $25 million in the Bayou fraud told the press, "I'll believe it when I see a body. It's just another fraudulent act." Security camera footage from near the bridge showed something interesting. A second car had pulled up behind Israel's SUV shortly before it was abandoned. Police suspected it was a getaway vehicle. They were right. Deborah had been there. When investigators questioned Deborah in the days that followed, she initially denied knowing anything about Israel's whereabouts. She told New York State Police she had found a suicide note written by Israel and handed it over. She maintained the story for 10 days. Then, on June 19th, she was arrested and charged with aiding and abetting his failure to report to prison. Under questioning, she admitted what she had done. She was released on a $75,000 bond. Israel, meanwhile, was living out of the RV, moving between campgrounds and highway rest areas across the northeastern United States. He and Deborah were featured on America's Most Wanted. U.S. Marshals were in contact with Israel's mother throughout the manhunt, keeping a line of communication open. And on the morning of July 2nd, 2008, 23 days after he had abandoned his car on that bridge, Samuel Israel III picked up his phone and called his mother. He was at a campground in the Southwick area of Massachusetts. He was on the phone with her when he walked up to local authorities and turned himself in. He had been on the run for less than a month. The plan he had spent weeks preparing lasted 23 days. On July 15th, 2009, federal judge Kenneth Karras sentenced Israel to an additional 2 years in prison, specifically for the fake suicide attempt. Deborah Ryan was sentenced to 3 years probation. Daniel Marino, the CFO who had helped create the fake auditing firm and maintain the false financial statements for years, was also sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay $300 million in restitution. As for the investors, by July 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice had managed to distribute over $128 million in recovered assets back to the people Israel had defrauded. Out of $450 million invested, that's a fraction. Most of them never got their money back. Israel applied for early compassionate release in 2014, citing health problems. The application was denied. He applied again in 2019. Judge McMahon acknowledged that his health was genuinely poor, but she said releasing him early would make a mockery of the sentencing statute. He was denied again. His scheduled release date is May 10th, 2026. Number 10. Audrey Marie Hilly. Audrey Marie Hilly was barely recognizable when they found her on that back porch in February of 1987. She was dirty, covered in mud, her clothing torn, her fingernails long and ragged. She was delirious, mumbling things that didn't make sense, unable to stand on her own. A neighbor who spotted her described her appearance as scary. When paramedics arrived and loaded her into an ambulance, she was slipping in and out of consciousness. She never made it to the hospital. She died on the way from hypothermia at the age of 53. How she ended up on that porch instead of sitting in a prison cell where she belonged is one of the strangest stories in American true crime history. Marie Hilly grew up in Anniston, Alabama, a small city in the northeastern part of the state, the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where reputation matters, and where your standing in the community is something people work to protect. Marie had spent years building that kind of image. She dressed well, kept the right company, and went to church. To her neighbors, she was a respectable wife and mother. But what they didn't know was that she had been slowly poisoning her husband. Frank Hilly was Marie's high school sweetheart. They got married back in 1951 while he was on leave from the Navy and settled down in Anniston. They had 2 kids, a son named Michael and a daughter named Carol, and a home in a decent neighborhood. Frank worked steadily and made a reasonable living, but Marie spent money faster than it came in. She liked expensive things and didn't really care about limits, and over time, that gap between what she wanted and what they had started causing problems between them. At some point, investigators were never able to pin down exactly when Marie started adding arsenic to Frank's food. Not in large amounts, just a little at a time, over months, in a way that made it look like a normal illness. By May of 1975, Frank started complaining of nausea and stomach pain. He went to the doctor, was examined, and after a series of tests, they concluded he had infectious hepatitis. He was admitted to the hospital, treated, and for a short time, he seemed to improve. Then he got worse. On May 25, 1975, Frank Hilly died. He was 45 years old. The death certificate listed hepatitis and kidney failure as the cause. At the time, no one questioned it. Marie collected $31,140 in life insurance, a policy she had secretly taken out on Frank during his illness, without his knowledge. For the next few years, life in the Hilly household went on. Marie kept up appearances and stayed social. But by 1978, the insurance money she had collected after Frank's death was gone. That's when she took out a $25,000 insurance policy on her 19-year-old daughter, Carol. In August of 1979, Carol started getting sick. The symptoms were almost identical to what Frank had gone through 4 years earlier. Carol was hospitalized, first at a local facility in Anniston, then later transferred to a hospital in Birmingham. As her condition got worse, she became so weak she could barely walk. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. Marie, meanwhile, was always there at her daughter's bedside, attentive, involved, and so seemingly devoted that nursing staff didn't stop her when she helped administer injections. At the time, no one questioned it. Then on September 19th, while Carol was being admitted to the University of Alabama Hospital in Birmingham, police showed up and arrested Marie right there in the waiting room. Not for poisoning, they didn't know about that yet. She had been writing bad checks, and it had finally caught up with her. With his mother suddenly out of the picture, Carol's brother Michael contacted the hospital and shared something that had been bothering him. No doctor had ever formally approved his mother to give Carol those injections. That immediately got their attention. A doctor named Brian Thompson took over Carol's care, and one of the first things he did was examine her fingernails. He noticed something called Aldrich-Mees lines, faint horizontal bands that can appear in cases of certain types of poisoning. He ordered a test for arsenic. What came back was shocking. Carol's hair showed arsenic levels more than 100 times higher than normal near the scalp, dropping to 0 at the ends. That pattern told investigators she had been given increasing doses over a period of about 4 to 8 months, and it told them something else. Whoever had been giving it to her had only recently stopped. On October 3rd, 1979, Frank Hilly's body was exhumed. The forensic team found arsenic levels in his remains ranging from 10 to 100 times the normal level. Dr. Joseph Embry of the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences concluded that Frank had not died of hepatitis. He had died of acute arsenic poisoning, the result of being slowly and deliberately poisoned over an extended period of time. On October 6th, Frank's sister, Freda Adcock, found a medicine vial among Marie's belongings stored at their mother's house. It tested positive for arsenic. On October 9th, still sitting in the Anniston jail on the check charges, Marie was charged with the attempted murder of her daughter. A vial found in her purse, which had been sitting in a police property locker, also tested positive for arsenic. On October 21st, a bottle of rat poison containing a 1.5% arsenic solution was found in her stored belongings in Freda Adcock's basement. On October 25th, a Calhoun County grand jury indicted Marie for the attempted murder of Carol Hilly. Her bail was set at $14,000. Somehow, people came forward to pay it. On November 9th, 1979, Audrey Marie Hilly walked out of jail. She was released on bail and was supposed to stay in the area and wait for her trial. 9 days later, on November 18th, her attorney came to check on her at the motel where she had been staying. The room was empty. Her belongings were still there, but she wasn't. The only thing left behind was a handwritten note suggesting she had been kidnapped. Police compared the handwriting to samples of Marie's writing, and it matched. She had written it herself. There was no kidnapping. She had simply walked out and disappeared. The next day, a burglary was reported at the home of Marie's aunt. A car was stolen, along with some women's clothing and an overnight bag. A note left at the scene read, "Do not call police." The FBI was brought in. A nationwide manhunt was launched. And on January 11th, 1980, a Calhoun County grand jury indicted Marie in absentia for the murder of her husband Frank. She was now wanted for murder and attempted murder, and nobody could find her. For the next 3 years, Marie stayed hidden. She changed her appearance, gave herself a new name, Robbie Hannon, and traveled to Florida, where she met a man named John Greenleaf Homan III. She told him she was a widow. She was charming, attentive, and gave him no reason to ask questions. He had no idea who she really was or where she had come from. They moved in together, relocated to New Hampshire in September of 1980, and on May 29th, 1981, they got married. She took his last name and became Robbie Homan. For a while, it worked. She lived a quiet domestic life in New Hampshire with a man who believed everything she told him. But then, in 1982, Marie made her next move, and it was one of the most audacious pieces of deception in this entire case. She told John she was seriously ill. She said she needed specialist treatment in Texas and that she had to go alone. He agreed, and she left. A few weeks later, she came back to New Hampshire, but she looked different. She had lost weight, dyed her hair a lighter color, and her appearance had clearly changed, and she came back with a story. She told John that Robbie, his wife, had died in Texas, and that she was Robbie's twin sister. Her name, she said, was Terry Martin. She had come to be with him while he was grieving. John Homan believed her. He started a relationship with this woman he thought was his wife's twin. They were living together in the same house, going about the same life, and he had no idea it was the same person. Then, in November of 1982, an obituary for Robbie Homan appeared in the Keene Sentinel, a local newspaper in New Hampshire. Marie had written it herself and submitted it. As far as the public record was concerned, Robbie Homan was dead. In January of 1983, New Hampshire State Police Detective Barry Hunter began looking into the death of Robbie Homan after the obituary appeared. Something about the details didn't add up. Around the same time, Police in the area were looking for a wanted bank robber named Carol Manning, a completely unrelated case, and the description matched a woman going by the name Terry Martin. On January 12, 1983, detectives approached Terry Martin as she was leaving work at a publishing company called The Book Press in Brattleboro, Vermont, where she had been working as an executive secretary. They brought her in for questioning, and sitting across from detectives at the police station, she told them her real name. She said she was Audrey Marie Hilly from Anniston, Alabama, and that she was wanted there for writing bad checks. When investigators ran her name through the FBI database, they found the murder and attempted murder charges. The manhunt that had been going on for 3 years was over. She was held at a correctional facility in Vermont, then extradited to Alabama on January 19, 1983. This time, her bond was set at $320,000. Her trial began on May 30, 1983, in the Calhoun County Circuit Court in Anniston. It lasted 9 days. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence from both Frank and Carol, the arsenic-laced vials found in Marie's belongings, and the testimony of several witnesses, including Carol herself, who took the stand against her own mother. On June 8, 1983, Audrey Marie Hilly was found guilty on both counts, the murder of Frank Hilly and the attempted murder of Carol Hilly. On June 19th, the judge sentenced her to life in prison for the murder and an additional 20 years for the attempted murder. She was taken to the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama, where she would spend the next several years. She was so well behaved that the prison eventually started giving her one-day passes. She used them without any problems, always returning on time. By February of 1987, she had earned a 3-day pass out of prison to visit John Homan, who had moved to Anniston to be closer to her. They stayed together at a boarding house in the city. At some point on February 19th, while Homan stepped out for a few hours, Marie left. She left behind a note asking for his forgiveness, and he called police right away. What happened over the next few days isn't entirely clear, but what is clear is that she was moving through the mountainous area around Anniston in the middle of winter, in freezing temperatures, in the rain, walking for miles, alone, with nowhere to go. On February 26, 1987, a woman named Sue Kraft was driving through the Blue Mountain neighborhood of Anniston when she noticed something unusual. There was a woman on the back porch of a nearby house, on her knees, trying to force the door open. She was covered in mud and barely moving. Sue called for help. By the time paramedics arrived, Marie was barely conscious. She was described as bleeding, bruised, with clothing torn from her body. She died on the way to the hospital. The official cause of death was hypothermia. Audrey Marie Hilly was buried in Forest Lawn Gardens and Mausoleum in Anniston, Alabama, next to her husband, Frank. And that's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. We'll see you in the next one.